If you're interested in working in tech in 2025 and you are an engineer, you're going to want to stick around for this video because I'm going to be talking about the generative AI engineer roadmap. Let's get into it. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Nello. I love to talk about tech, data, AI, and career. So if you're interested in any of that, you're going to love it here. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Before we dive into it, I want to say that everything I share in this video is going to be based on my own personal experience. You might hear something different from somebody else. That's probably based on their experience. So everything I'm sharing is going to be based on my experience, and I imagine that it would differ from others. I specifically chose to talk about the Gen AI roadmap because I have done multiple interviews in the generative AI engineer role, and we're literally going to just pull up multiple JDs and look at the requirements so that you, if you're interested in the generative AI engineer role, can kind of see patterns on what these recruiters are kind of asking for. It really is that easy. It's not rocket science, okay? I'd like to start with explaining who the generative AI engineer is. A generative AI engineer is somebody who builds the generative AI application stack. So now there are different ways to actually apply AI. Generative AI is when you start to talk about the use of large language model. When you say generative, it just really means you're generating something with AI. It's really that easy. It's that literal. So when you hear people talk about large language models, things like ChatGPT, they generate data. Some of them generate images, some of them generate videos, some of them generate text. These are all generative AI. And the engineers who build generative AI solutions are called generative AI engineers. I want you to have that context as we have this conversation because there are AI engineers and then there are generative AI engineers. These are two completely different roles, okay? An AI engineer is maybe working on something like PyTorch, maybe just building AI solutions. It could be deep learning, it could be natural language processing, which is not necessarily generative AI engineering, but generative AI engineering specifically, I believe, would work with large language models or some kind of LLM to build their solutions because their tech stack is generative AI, right? So they're building generative AI solutions. The way that I want us to go about this is to pull up one of the job descriptions that I have been emailed because a lot of recruiters email me job descriptions around generative AI, and we can look at what they're requiring and kind of use that as a roadmap to guide you on some of the things that you can expect if you are working in a generative AI role. Before I pull up the job description, there's some foundational things I want us to get out of the way, which are things like, number one, just understanding the field of generative AI, which is what I just went through, which would be something like understanding what the difference between an AI and a generative AI is, understanding the models, understanding the entire generative AI scope. Another thing which I think is foundational and basic would be math and statistics. Now, when it comes to generative AI solutions, I think this is crucial because you may work with what we call vector databases and a concept called chunking and things like that. And what I've seen, these are concepts that would probably work best with people who understand math and stats or have like really technical backgrounds. So if you don't have a technical background, you might have to sit this one out. So I'm going to put a screenshot of this job description on the screen. This is a generative AI engineer. It's a senior/lead role. And basically what is required in this role are tools like large language model APIs, because again, you're building Gen AI solutions. So I imagine that you're going to be integrating all these large language models. It could be Claude, it could be OpenAI, whatever large language model is going to be integrated into your solution is going to be one of the many things that will be integrated. I'm seeing RAG, which has been popular recently amongst all the technical techie. And if you're going to build a Gen AI solution, you probably might want to customize it. And how do you do that without a good knowledge of RAG? It's probably not possible. I'm seeing Azure. So I imagine that you would also need to understand like the cloud, because where are these solutions going to be deployed? Probably on the cloud. So you might need to know like one of the many cloud solutions. It could be AWS, it could be GCP, it could be Azure, depending on the solution that the company currently has. I'm seeing API and microservices. So obviously you're going to need to understand how APIs work, because no company is really going to build their own LLM from scratch. They're going to utilize an external model and then probably leverage their data to use the model as a tool to build their solution. So if you don't understand APIs, you probably wouldn't be able to help them with that integration. I'm seeing things like Docker, Kubernetes, because obviously your solution is going to be deployed in a realistic environment. These are the tools that you use when it comes to like deployment, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and it's a huge requirement. You need to know these things. And then I'm seeing agile development and innovation. Obviously, I imagine that there's going to be a Scrum team. If you work in tech, this is not something that is new to you, but if you're completely new, I would recommend just reading about the Agile and the Scrum framework. To be fair, if you're an engineer, it's nothing that you can pick up quickly, because you're just going to be participating. You're really not the person that is running like the meetings. So that's not your cup of tea. Another thing I'm seeing here is LangChain. So LangChain there are different frameworks. I particularly took a crash course on LangChain just because I wanted to understand it so that I could be up to date in what's going on in the industry and what the tech stack is. I like to do that. And it basically is a framework that you can use to build generative AI solutions. I don't know how much it would remain to be the go-to, because now we have AI agents, and I imagine that the way you build an AI agent is totally different from the way you build a generative AI solution using RAG. But I haven't dived into AI agents yet, so I really can't speak on that. But I can, however, talk about solutions that use RAG, and here are the requirements. I'm going to list some of these requirements on the screen. So the first thing, like I said, is just the foundational knowledge of basic math, obviously statistics, because that would help with you knowing LangChain and RAGs and all those things. Basic knowledge of AI in general, so machine learning and things like that. Let me list out all the tech stack on this job description. AI, ML, PyTorch, TensorFlow, Hugging Face, Pinecone, LLMs and API. So OpenAI, LangChain, Crew AI, Cloud and DevOps. So they have AWS, Azure, Kubernetes, Docker, CI/CD, security and compliance. They have HIPAA, Auth2, JWD. Bear in mind, this is a senior role, so you may not need to have all of this if you are like a junior GenAI engineer. And this job description is requiring 8 years of experience, and you must have all of this. So if you're interested in generative AI as a beginner, I would recommend just having basic knowledge. It really depends on the company, but having enough knowledge to scale through the interview is what I would recommend, because on the job, once you can prove to people that you're a problem solver and you can learn, when you get into the company on the job, most times they hold your hand. They really just like support you to be successful at that point. You're not doing anything to get in anymore. You're playing a different game. So to get in, I would just say learn everything that is required for you to pass the interview, and then you probably have a different challenge once you get into the company. So as you guys can see, these are the things that are being required for a generative AI engineer role. So I'm going to reiterate the things that from my experience, recruiters typically look for when they are looking for a generative AI engineer. The first thing, obviously, is math and statistics. And I think this is crucial, because if you don't have those foundational math and stats skills, you probably wouldn't succeed or pass the interview or be able to learn the skills. Next is programming skills. You have to be able to code. This is not a no-code role. Generative AI engineer, you do need to know how to code. Another thing I would say, machine learning frameworks. So you have to understand like Pinecone, Hugging Face, all those libraries, LangChain. Not necessarily supervised and unsupervised learning, because that's really not what generative AI engineers do, but things around RAG and Pinecone and LangChain and things along those lines. And I'll put more of them on the screen and different job descriptions so you can kind of see that. The next thing you need to know is cloud, which is probably Azure, GCP, or AWS. And then lastly, Kubernetes, or Docker, which are like the CI/CD components of like everything. This is typically what is being required. So if you are looking to explore a generative AI engineer role, which I think is in high demand right now, these are the tech stack that I would be learning. I think that it's doable if you can put your head down and learn and build multiple projects and perfect your knowledge of like vector databases, LangChain, RAGs. These skill sets are not yet very saturated, although things are changing very, very quickly. Like I said, I have not explored the AI agent space just yet. But when it comes to generative AI, I have done a couple of interviews for Gen AI engineer positions, and these are typically the stack that is being looked for. And it typically requires coding interview. Yes, I've done a couple of coding interviews for generative AI roles. And when I tell people that I do coding interviews, they're like, oh my God, like, yes, I know I don't look like it. But listen, the time comes, when push comes to shove, I'll put on my two-piece and do what I have to do, okay? Because guess what? Nobody's going to pay you to do nothing. You have to be valuable. And when I'm working in a 9 to 5 and not building my own company, I act like it. When I'm the CEO of my company, I'm the CEO of my company. I'm leading my team. But when I'm a professional in the corporate space, I'm a professional in the corporate space. And that's just what it is. If anybody else has any questions around generative AI engineering, I'm happy to answer your questions. Again, this has been based on my own personal experience. If you have explored the Gen AI engineering role, let me know if the things that I said are kind of similar to your experience. And as always, I'll see you guys next week. Bye.